McQuestion. For over 25 years, talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, CF Accountants and Consultants, adding value to clients throughout the region, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
One of the things we do on this program is to give you background on issues that you can use to put everyday news items into perspective. One of those issues that is often in the news is oil, and specifically its availability and prices. On this program, we'll take you from 1859 or 1846, when oil was discovered in Pennsylvania, to Spindletop in Texas in 1901, through the Arabian Peninsula to the formation of OPEC in 1960, to the gas lines in 73 and 79, and the collapse of oil prices in 1986. Let's meet the experts. First on my left is David Drumm. He's an oil and gas attorney with Carrington Coleman in Dallas. He's a past president of the Dallas Philosophers Forum, and he's the chairman of the Hatton W. Summers Foundation. David, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Dennis. Great to be here.
Sitting next to you is Bruce Cutright. He's a research scientist associate at the Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas in Austin, and you're a geologist, Bruce. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dennis. Glad to be here.
And sitting next to you is a guy who's joining us after many years of absence, Barry Krosman. He spent his entire business career in the energy business, primarily with Caltex, which was a multinational joint venture of Chevron and Texaco. So, Barry, before I get you to give us some perspective on the dates, I have this great cartoon that I use from time to time, and it shows a young man doing his homework and looking up at his dad. And homework is obviously history, and he's looking up at his dad. He says, "Of course you were good at history, Dad. You were there for most of it." Okay, so in your case, you should be good at this because you were there for most of it. Give us some dates.
Well, not the 1900.
Well, okay, all right, just checking.
Anyhow, what I wanted to do was to provide just a little perspective on history. The oil industry has been subjected to boom and bust from the very beginning. So over the 170 years since oil was first discovered, first drilled for and brought to the surface in Baku, Azerbaijan, in 1846, we've had ups and downs, but we've had also tremendous investment and tremendous technological progress. But some of the key dates, you will remember 1859 in Titusville, Pennsylvania, when oil was discovered there. By 1900, Baku, actually Azerbaijan, you will remember the names Rothschild and Nobel, famous names among others, that were producing more oil than the United States at that time. But by 1901, Spindletop was discovered and Texas took off. Within 5 years, there were 1,500 oil companies operating, but today probably only 4 or 5 of those still exist. In 1906, Standard Oil Company, who you always remember as the big trust that had everything, they only produced 11% of the oil, but they had 85% of marketing, transport, and refining. That's where their control lied. In 1908, in Persia, Iran, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which you would know today as BP, found oil. By 1926, the U.S. was producing 70% of the oil in the world. This is how the U.S. dominated this industry up until just the recent past. By 1927, a company called Turkish Petroleum Company, which later became Iraq Petroleum Company, also discovered oil. And you remember there was something called the Red Line Agreement, which had a lot of controversy, but also an interesting aside from this period of time was an Armenian by the name of Kalous Gulbenkian, the name.
That's who I was thinking of. Yeah, thank you for mentioning it.
Had 5% of all the profits from oil produced, of the value of all the oil produced in the Iraq Petroleum Company. So he became exceptionally wealthy. But by 1930, there was a major discovery in East Texas by a person by the name of Dad Joyner. And his leases were bought by somebody by the name of H.L. Hunt, who parlayed that into quite a fortune. But by 1931, there was a massive collapse in prices. Oil was selling for as low as 10 cents a barrel, if you can imagine that.
I'd like to bring those times back, Barry.
In 1938, after a 5-year search and almost going home, but defying the head office and staying for one more well, Chevron discovered oil in Saudi Arabia, which is today the largest producer of oil in the world. For the period from the 30s through 1972, a little group of 3 people, they sometimes called them a cartel, but also the Texas Railroad Commission, basically controlled prices by controlling production in Texas. And that's how important Texas was at that time, even though oil was being produced in California, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Kansas, etc. But in 1972, they abandoned all hope because by that time, oil demand far exceeded anything that could be supplied, and they just said 100% from now on, and that's it. And then we had, in 1960, as you mentioned, OPEC was formed, but they weren't really effective in the beginning. It wasn't until 1973 when after the Yom Kippur War, we had the embargo and all the chaos with that. But by a year or 2 later, everything was back to almost normal again.
Okay, let me stop you right there for a minute and tell you a story, and you tell me if it's accurate. I've told this story as if it were true many times. So this person watching, I think it's true. The expert may tell me it isn't. So I understand that at the University of Texas at Austin, there were a lot of people coming there, students from all over the world, as they do now at my university, yes. And there's someone from Venezuela was in school there, and while they were in school there and later on, they went back to Venezuela and became the oil minister, and they noted how the Texas Railroad Commission, am I right about this so far?
I think you're right.
How the Texas Railroad Commission controlled the flow of oil in order to keep the price up, yes? And when they became later on the oil minister in Venezuela, they got together, and I think at the time at OPEC was just Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, yes. Right? And so he said, if Texas Railroad Commission can do this in Texas and control some of the world this way, surely we can do this worldwide. Is that a true story? Close enough?
I think so, yes.
I think so too. So I'm just saying we love Texas, but we did a bad thing by being a model there. Now you go ahead with your story, okay?
Okay. Then just a couple little statistics beyond that. In 1950, the world was consuming about 10.4 million barrels a day, and the United States was producing 5.4 million of that. By 1970, the world was producing about 44.9 million barrels a day, and the U.S. was producing 9.6 million barrels a day. And you'll recognize that's the number about that the U.S. was producing last year. Right. But by 1990, the last year of this session, the world was producing about 60.6 million barrels a day, and the U.S. was down to 7.4 million barrels a day. And so what we've seen is major transformations in the industry, and I'm sure it will continue for many years to come, and who knows where it will be.
Well, that's a very great background.
And the last thing I wanted to mention was the one thing the United States has seen over all this period is government intervention. Some to benefit the oil industry, some to hurt the oil industry, and we're talking now about export bans that don't make any sense in a free market enterprise system, and here we are.
And that's a subject for our third program, so thank you. Now, Bruce, you have heard this excellent summary of his, so take a look. He always looks at things above ground, things like that. Take a look down there and tell us from the beginning in 1846. I didn't even know about 1846 in Baku. 1846, 1859, all these other places. Tell us what we knew then about the geology, what we sort of knew in 1990, if you can bring us up to date in that story.
Well, the easy answer to what we knew in 1846 or 1879 was really nothing. All of the original oil finds were based on seeps that were observed at the surface. And someone would come in and, well, that looks good, let's dig a hole. and that hole would turn into a well, and suddenly the well is producing more than you could get out of the seep, and that's how the early oil development began. And it wasn't really until